Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Wirtz. After Rebecca and her husband divorced, she and her daughter, Jennifer, moved to the Somerset Tower residential area. She purchased an apartment in a 7-story building in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Jennifer felt that her mother was having a hard time during this period, and she thought that it had something to do with her parents' divorce. However, Rebecca's loneliness didn't last long. She soon met Charles, a worker at the complex, and they began a romantic relationship. Charles was an eccentric and cheerful man who often joked around. Before long, Charles moved in with Rebecca. Initially, she felt this was a positive change after the emotional hardships of her divorce. She appeared to enjoy her new relationship. However, Charles's behavior soon became concerning. His mood swings were drastic. He could go from laughing hysterically to becoming angry. He started to seem unpredictable and strange. Charles worked on weekends, and during this time, Jennifer saw the true nature of he. Charles began harassing her and quickly progressed to sexual violence. At just 7 years old, Jennifer realized that something terrible was happening. Little girl mustered the courage to tell her mother, Rebecca, about it. However, Rebecca didn't believe her daughter. Rebecca dismissed her claims, telling her that she was imagining things, which caused she to resent her mother. Rebecca never took any action against Charles, not even to investigate her daughter's allegations. As a result, the abuse continued regularly. Jennifer felt so miserable that she didn't want to go home after school because her mother was not supportive. This situation persisted for 3 years. On February 26, 1991, police contacted Rebecca to ask for information about her missing neighbor, Dee Dee Rosenthal. Detectives interviewed everyone in the area to gather information about Dee Dee. That same day, they also questioned a local rapist named Charles. He surprised them by claiming he did not know Dee Dee, despite the fact that they had been neighbors for a long time. As an employee of the complex, he should have seen her regularly at work. Dee Dee Rosenthal, 32, is a therapist who specializes in supporting children with autism. Her colleagues, patients, neighbors, and family all spoke highly of her, indicating that no one would wish her harm. Dee Dee had moved from Canada to the United States less than a year before her disappearance. Witnesses reported seeing her for the last time on February 22nd, and since then, there had been no leads. Investigators spoke not only with neighbors but also with Dee Dee's family. Her brother, Blaine, mentioned that Dee Dee had aspirations of attending the Alvin Institute in Philadelphia, a dream she had since college, which motivated her move to the U.S. The Alvin Institute is a specialized clinic designed to help children with autism. Blaine expressed disapproval of Dee Dee's decision to move to the United States, feeling that it was a harsh place and very different from Canada and their familiar traditions. He admitted to the police that he tried his best to prevent her from leaving for a foreign country, but she was very determined, took everything for granted, and believed she would be able to return home soon. Witnesses reported seeing a woman who resembled Dee Dee, but identified her as Lori. Unfortunately, these leads did not yield any results. Ultimately, his hopes were not realized, and Dee Dee vanished without a trace. At the beginning of the investigation, the police focused on 2 suspects, both of whom worked at the apartment complex where Dee Dee disappeared. The first suspect was Steve Gomez, Dee Dee's boyfriend. The second was Charles Reddish, the man known locally as Crazy Charles. Both men appeared suspicious, but the police lacked concrete evidence against them. Despite this, they remained on the investigators' radar. Charles claimed he spent the entire day on February 22nd with his mother and a young girl named Jennifer. Little girl confirmed his alibi, stating he was with her the whole time. The police could not find any evidence to charge Charles. However, some detectives noticed Jennifer's fear when they mentioned him. This caught the attention of investigators, but they could not take any action against Charles without further evidence or testimony. The Wirtz family experienced several years of suffering and humiliation after a mysterious incident, which ultimately led them to move out of the apartment complex. While this may make people suspicious, the act actually stems from anxiety about the possibility of a crime happening around them. Many residents chose to leave for their safety because rumors of Dee Dee's disappearance had spread quickly. People were eager to distance themselves from the possibility of living near a potential criminal. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation. As they gathered more information, they encountered increasingly conflicting clues. Forensic experts examined the home of Dee Dee, but found it completely empty. The apartment was clean and tidy, with no signs of forced entry or a struggle. However, the front door was unlocked, which was unusual for a missing person case. Despite their efforts, forensic experts found no evidence of blood. It appeared as if Dee Dee had calmly left her apartment, as her belongings were untouched and her car was still parked outside. The only clue investigators discovered was an $80 check hidden in a diary, but there was no cash in her purse or wallet. All clues pointed to Dee Dee having left her home voluntarily. Investigators learned that she had financial difficulties, often spending more than she earned and have a lot of debt, but these problems do not appear to be serious enough to involve kidnapping or murder. However, it raised the question, did Dee Dee leave to escape her creditors? After interviewing all of Dee Dee's neighbors, detectives uncovered a concerning claim from one elderly woman. She reported that on February 22nd, around 4 a.m., she was awakened by a loud thud from the ceiling, which she later realized was caused by Dee Dee, her upstairs neighbor. The sound startled her, but after a brief silence, she assumed it was just something that had fallen and returned to sleep. Meanwhile, all the other residents provided no useful information, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Dee Dee's sudden disappearance captured public attention, and the media began extensively covering the story. However, due to a lack of evidence, the case remained unresolved for years. The Wirtz family later moved into a new home north of Cherry Hill. Rebecca and Jennifer felt so sad for Dee Dee, but they never knew what happened to her. Over time, they, like others, gradually forgot about Dee Dee, including the police, who suggested she might have returned to Canada. Dee Dee's brother Blaine is not satisfied with this explanation and continues to search for her. Unlike everyone else, he is the only one who doesn't give up. He's frustrated by law enforcement's inability to provide answers or locate Dee Dee. He spent years visiting local bars, restaurants, and neighbors' apartments around Hill 67, interviewing anyone who might have information. Eventually, Blaine admits that his relentless search has become a kind of obsession, causing him to lose almost everything, including his family. One day, upon returning home from another search, his wife told him she wanted to break up, marking the end of their relationship. Life was challenging for the Wirtz family after they moved to a new home. They understood why Charles was called crazy. He often acted inappropriately and hurled insults at Rebecca and Jennifer. His aggression was escalating, and although Jennifer never witnessed he physically harmed her mother, Rebecca, but little girls suspected that her mother was also suffering from his abusive behavior. However, they stayed together and Rebecca endured the troubles of the relationship. For years, Jennifer suffered from the pain of his abuse, and little girl knew her mother was enduring the same. Despite everything, Rebecca was not ready to leave him. Jennifer spent a lot of time trying to convince her mother, Rebecca, to leave Charles. Eventually, little girl succeeded in persuading her mother that their toxic relationship needed to end. They planned an escape and decided to move in with Jennifer's grandmother, a place Charles had never visited, which would keep them hidden. Jennifer was thrilled with this plan. Little girl looked forward to being free from Charles, the man who had tormented her for so long. It seemed like they were on the verge of freedom. However, Rebecca made a critical mistake by inadvertently revealing their plans to Charles. It was Jennifer's last day at school. Following Rebecca's request, little girl had secretly packed her belongings in advance and hidden them. According to their plan, Rebecca was supposed to pick her up after school around 6 p.m., right after she finished playing field hockey with her friends. When she went to the parking lot, she was surprised to see not her mother driving, but Charles, and her mother sitting in the passenger seat. Angered, she yelled at her mother, feeling frustrated that her mother never kept her promises. In response, Rebecca simply told she to get in the car and calm down. Inside the car, an eerie silence fell. Jennifer felt a sense of foreboding throughout the journey. Charles watched her intently through the rearview mirror, and she dreaded what awaited her at home. Jennifer worries that he has bad intentions to keep her and her mother by his side. When they got home, Charles seemed normal. He said he wanted to have a farewell party before they left. But Jennifer didn't buy it. Her fears were confirmed when they entered the house and found no dinner prepared. Confused, little girl asked about it, but he stammered a vague explanation, then abruptly stating he needed the car keys to buy groceries and rushed out. Desperate, Jennifer urged Rebecca to seize the moment and escape before Charles returned, sensing something was off. However, Rebecca dismissed her concerns and told her to wait for he to return. He has a surprise for them. Frustrated, Jennifer retreated to her room, lay down on her bed, and eventually fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Jennifer was jolted awake by a loud noise around 2 a.m. Alarmed, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She got up and began to descend the stairs, the noise growing louder. When she reached the doorway, she realized something terrible was happening. The sounds were like violent blows, and little girl felt helpless, not knowing how long this horrifying scene would continue. Rebecca was lying on the floor, while her attacker, Charles, leaned over her, striking her repeatedly. Suddenly, he turned around and saw Jennifer. He grabbed the little girl by her hair and dragged her into the living room, where the violence was happening. As he pulled she past Rebecca, she saw something horrifying. Her mother's face was so badly injured that she could hardly recognize her. Rebecca, 43 years old, had a shattered jaw and a broken arm, and she showed no signs of life. To Jennifer, it looked like her mother was dead. Desperate, Jennifer pleaded with Charles not to harm them and to let them go. But he threw her into a chair in the living room, positioning her directly in front of Rebecca. Then, he picked up a small axe from the floor and slowly approached Rebecca. Panicking, little girl screamed for him to stop. She could hear her mother's labored breathing and realized her mother was still alive. But soon, there were more blows, and he attacking her mother. He was literally chopping into Rebecca with the axe. The smell of blood filled the air. Then, he pulled the sheet off Jennifer and dragged her upstairs to the bedroom. There, he tortured and raped her for 2 to 3 hours. Little girl was powerless to resist and simply prayed for it all to end. After Charles finished his torment, he sat next to Jennifer on the bed. She was badly injured and covered in blood, but she was still alive. Then, he asked her to kill him. Jennifer replied that she couldn't do that. He suddenly declared that he would kill her and then end his life, as he didn't want to end up in prison. Terrified, Jennifer didn't want to take a life, even one as evil as Charles's. Although she felt helpless, she remembered methods she had seen in crime shows about negotiating with hostage takers, and she decided to apply them. Little girl focused on listening calmly to he. She aimed to show empathy, hoping to soothe him, and gradually convinced him not only to spare her life, but also to reconsider taking his own. Jennifer advised Charles that it would be a good idea if he told the police the truth, saying that he had lost control and was acting erratically. Besides, he could also negotiate with the prosecutor to get a reduced sentence. However, he feeling uncertain, began pacing back and forth in the bedroom, holding a bloody axe. For the first time, he understood the severity of what he had done. Little girl managed to persuade he to surrender to the police, and then she called 911 for help. She was clearly in shock and find it difficult to express one's thoughts. Charles even assisted Jennifer's in getting up, dressing, and walking to the porch. The dispatcher informed them that the police were on their way, and they just had to wait. It's difficult to imagine what Jennifer was feeling during this time. She knew that he was unpredictable and could harm them at any moment. Despite this, little girl waited calmly for the police to arrive. Then, they quickly separated she from Charles. One of the detectives investigating Charles recalled his unusual reaction when asked about Rebecca's location. He vaguely stated she was inside the house and, when asked if she needed an ambulance, he claimed she can no longer be helped. Despite his assertion, it was clear that help was urgently required. A detective from the Cherry Hill Police Department arrived at the scene. This was the same officer who had investigated Dee Dee's disappearance 4 years ago. He remembered a repairman named Charles, who had caught his attention back then, and now he decided to question Charles's again. The police, along with Charles, entered the house equipped with a tape recorder to document the incident. They aimed to piece together the horrifying incidents that had taken place there. During the questioning, both the accounts of Charles and Jennifer aligned, until Jennifer disclosed the rape and torture that took place in her bedroom. Charles completely denied these allegations, he seemingly unable to accept the reality of what he had done to she. When the police mentioned the rape, he laughed, dismissing the idea of being intimate with Jennifer, a 14-year-old girl, as ridiculous. However, as the interrogation continued, he confessed to everything. Detectives from the Cherry Hill station suspect Charles has vital information about Dee Dee's case. Knowing that it was easy to get information out of Charles, they questioned him again about the disappearance of Dee Dee, who had been gone for 4 years. Their intuition was right, and he began confessing. He revealed that early one morning, he entered Dee Dee's apartment through the roof, descending onto her balcony. His intention was to rob and assault her. However, she caught him in the act. Then, in the struggle, he attacked her, raped her, and subjected her to mistreatment. He feared that she could identify him and report him to the police. To eliminate this risk, he decided to kill her. Charles explained that they fought on the bed, and during the struggle, Dee Dee fell to the floor. The loud noise of her fall was heard by a neighbor below. After that, he strangled her with a pillow and fled the scene. He had stolen $80 from her apartment, which the police found the next day. Subsequently, he returned to the scene, wrapped Dee Dee's body in a sheet, and transported it to the parking lot in a grocery cart. He also gathered her belongings and disposed of them in a nearby dumpster. After confessing to both murders, Charles led police to where he hid Dee Dee's body. But unfortunately, he couldn't recall the exact location. However, the police still believed him because he provided specific details about the crime that only the perpetrator could have known. He claimed to have taken Dee Dee to the Delaware River area, and he disposed of the body in a spot known for frequent waste dumping. During the 4 years Dee Dee's body lay there, thousands of tons of garbage accumulated, making the search extremely difficult. Despite extensive efforts, but the remains of Dee Dee were never found, and the search was eventually discontinued. Charles faced 2 trials for the murders. After the search concluded, both cases were assigned to a prosecutor from Hill. Following the initial meeting with the lawyer, Charles, apparently on the advice of his defense attorney, withdrew his earlier confessions to the murders. In any case, a confession alone is not enough to result in a conviction in the state of New Jersey. To achieve a conviction, any oral confession must be accompanied by specific and credible evidence. This means that Dee Dee's murder is unlikely to go unsolved, as the police have little evidence left other than an $80 check. 2 trials took place, one after the other, with Charles as the defendant in both cases. The first trial involved the murder of Rebecca Wirtz and the torture of her daughter, Jennifer. During the trial, Jennifer demonstrated courage and composure as a witness, providing clear and concise answers. The forensic expert testified about Rebecca's severe injuries, which included at least 25 axe blows. Due to the overwhelming evidence against Charles, the jury delivered a guilty verdict after only 40 minutes of deliberation. As a result, Charles received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The second trial involved the death of Dee Dee Rosenthal and presented a more complex situation. Although the prosecutor aimed to achieve a harsher punishment, the difficulty lay in the lack of evidence at the crime scene, which Charles had meticulously cleaned up. Furthermore, Charles retracted his earlier confession and presented an alibi, claiming that Dee Dee had simply moved away to start a new life. This new testimony gave Charles a chance to avoid conviction. However, the prosecutor tried to prove that Dee Dee was not the type of person who would give up everything and go adventuring. She has completely devoted her love to taking care of autistic children, and she cannot leave them. Her brother, Blaine, corroborated this, stating that she would have informed him if she had planned to leave. Furthermore, all of her belongings, including her documents, keys, car, and pet cat, were still in her apartment. In Charles's recorded confession, he claimed that Rebecca was the only person who knew about his involvement in Dee Dee's murder. It is unclear why Rebecca chose to keep this a secret. Perhaps she was afraid of Charles or did not believe the truth. He stated in his confession, as well as in a previous conversation with his daughter, that he was under the influence of prohibited substances during both crimes. Charles Reddish was initially charged with Dee Dee Rosenthal's murder in November 1995. 3 years later, in December 1998, he was convicted of the crimes he committed against Rebecca and Jennifer. By March 2001, he agreed to confess to Dee Dee's manslaughter as part of a plea bargain with the prosecution. The terms of the agreement required he to reveal the location of Dee Dee's body. However, at the last minute, he changed his mind and refused to comply. The prosecutor believed that he realized the extent of his crimes and was concerned about additional charges, which led to him changing his mind. Consequently, the plea bargain was withdrawn, and he went to trial again in October 2001. Charles again made false claims that Dee Dee was still alive and mentioned a missing woman named Laura. However, the jury saw through the lie, and he was sentenced to death in 2002. But in 2004, the New Jersey Supreme Court overturned the death sentence. 1 year later, it was replaced with a prison term of 30 to 60 years, which was added to his life sentence for Rebecca and Jennifer. Unfortunately, the body of Dee Dee was never recovered. After the trial, Jennifer was able to start a new life. She moved in with her cousin Shannon. She was finally able to live a peaceful life, free from the years of torture and mistreatment. She attended a Catholic school, joined a support group for young girls who had survived traumatic experiences. Her relatives provided significant support. As she grew older, Jennifer was able to come to terms with the traumatic experiences she had endured. She worked hard, built a successful career, started a family, and became a mother to 2 daughters. Blaine, Dee Dee's brother, held on to hope, despite his failure to find his missing younger sister. Blaine felt relieved to know that justice had been served, and especially that Charles was no longer causing harm to anyone because he was in custody. In tribute to Dee Dee, Blaine established a Canadian foundation in her name, focusing on supporting women who have endured physical and emotional abuse. The case of Sophia Urrutia. The Urrutia family lived in Canning Vale, a suburb of Perth with about 35,000 residents. The family included 7 members and a dog. The children were Isabel, the youngest at 3 years old, Sophia, who was 8, Ines, 11, and Gabriel, who was 14. The parents, though busy with work, maintained a close relationship with their children and treated them well. Josephine, the mother, was a loving and caring woman who worked hard to provide comfort for her family and manage the household. Caring for children from toddler to teenager is a challenging task because the needs of children at each stage are different. The father often had to go on business trips to Hong Kong, resulting in frequent absences from home. 8-year-old Sophia Urrutia, a girl attending a Catholic elementary school where she was loved by all her classmates and teachers. Sophia was well-mannered, naturally tactful, inquisitive. She helped her mother and took care of her younger sister. Sophia had many hobbies, including painting and dancing. Her uncle, who lived with them, often helped with the children and frequently took them on outings. On June 26, 2006, the kids eagerly await a trip to the mall. Little do they know that a dangerous force is also at work there. It was a regular weekday. The uncle picked up the children after school, and they went to the local shopping center, Leamington. It was a small shopping area, but it had everything local residents needed. 3 children were with their uncle, 14-year-old Gabriel, 11-year-old Ines, and 8-year-old Sophia. During their walk, Sophia excitedly shared that she had been chosen to perform an interesting Indonesian dance. She was thrilled and proud, and her uncle and siblings praised her. While at the shopping center, Sophia needed to use the restroom and informed them at the checkout. Being familiar with the shopping center, her uncle allowed her to go alone while they finished unpacking and paying for their items. The restroom wasn't far, and Sophia ran off by herself. The uncle watched her until she entered the restroom, not realizing it would be the last time he saw her alive. After paying, they left the store and went to wait for Sophia outside the restroom, but she took longer than expected. Concerned, the uncle moved closer to call out to her, but there was no response. He didn't enter the women's restroom, so he sent Gabriel and Ines to check both the women's and men's restrooms. Ines knocked on the women's door, but there was no answer. Gabriel checked the men's restroom, but it was silent. They also tried the nearby disabled restroom, where they heard some noise, but a male voice responded that it was occupied, scaring them away. Worried, Gabriel and Ines thought Sophia might have exited through another door, possibly heading to a restaurant or becoming lost in the shopping center. Sophia's uncle waited in the hallway, while the rest searched for her around the shopping center. After 10 minutes, Gabriel couldn't wait any longer and went back to the toilets to call out to her, thinking she hadn't heard him. As he approached the disabled toilet, the door suddenly swung open. A tough-looking guy, about 20 years old, emerged. Their eyes met briefly, and Gabriel instinctively felt something was wrong. Gabriel immediately noticed Sophia's discarded school uniform in the waste bin. He moved closer and saw a lifeless, naked body on the floor. By then, the guy had already run down the corridor and was out of sight. Gabriel rushed to Sophia, but she showed no signs of life. He began to scream in the toilet. The uncle and the other children who were with Sophia at the mall that day quickly arrived at the scene. The police were called immediately, and mall security was notified. The entire mall was closed. Top doctors confirmed the girl's death. They couldn't save her. Forensic experts sealed the toilet and began examining the crime scene to ensure no important evidence was damaged or lost. Gabriel, who witnessed the criminal, was able to describe him, prompting police to search the mall for the suspicious man who had emerged from the handicapped restroom. During their initial search, the police could not locate him within the premises and assumed he had already escaped. The public was shocked by the brutal crime that had taken place. In what seemed like a safe, quiet place, no one imagined that letting a child go to the toilet could result in losing them forever. This murder would later be deemed the most brutal in Western Australia's history due to the horrific nature of the crime and Sophia's injuries. Unfortunately, the CCTV cameras in the corridor were not working that day. At the time, detectives only had a description provided by Gabriel, which was clearly insufficient. The crime was committed with horrifying brutality. The child, Sophia, died from suffocation. The attacker not only cut off her air supply but also squeezed her neck so forcefully that her larynx was completely crushed. Her arms were dislocated, and she suffered severe injuries and ruptures due to forced sexual assault. The forensic expert concluded that the attack lasted about 5 minutes, during which the attacker brutally harmed she. Even the most seasoned detectives, who regularly deal with various crimes, also described the case as the most serious they had ever encountered. Sophia had no reason to use the disabled toilet. It was possible that she was quickly dragged inside by someone. The criminal was probably already inside, waiting for a victim, and Sophia was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, becoming an unintended victim. She was seized so suddenly that she didn't have time to scream. The attacker immediately began strangling her. She stood no chance against an adult man and couldn't even call for help, even though her relatives were nearby and heard nothing. Investigators began compiling a list of all sex offenders in the area and questioned shopping center employees using a portrait of the suspect. It was urgent to find the criminal because panic was spreading throughout the city. People were terrified by the brutal attack on a young girl and were afraid to go outside. Several shopping center employees recognized the man in the portrait as 21 years old Dante Wyndham Arthurs. He is fat, looks very pale, and worked as a packer of vegetables and fruits at one of the stores in the shopping center. On the day of the incident, Dante was on shift but then disappeared. The police became interested in him and checked his criminal history. They discovered that 3 years prior to this murder, he had been arrested for sexually assaulting another 8-year-old girl. At that time, the police lacked sufficient evidence to charge him, so he was released. Early the next morning, around 5 o'clock, detectives, knowing Dante's address, went to his home, where he lived with his parents, just a short distance from the shopping center. They interrogated Dante and searched his residence. During the search, investigators discovered a sports bag containing latex gloves, handcuffs, rope, a knife, and several photographs with personal information. The oldest girl in the photos was 15 years old, and the others were younger. Some photos included details such as names, ages, home addresses, and the shortest routes to reach them using public transport, suggesting he was stalking these girls and planning attacks. However, Sophia was not among these photos. Within hours, Dante was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, as well as sexual assault and forcible detention of Sophia. Dante Wyndham Arthurs was born on August 8, 1984, in Western Australia. His family soon moved to the UK, where they lived for 8 years before returning to Australia. As a teenager, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a condition marked by difficulties with social communication and repetitive, obsessive behavior. During questioning, he neither confirmed nor denied his guilt and did not take the events seriously. He described the situation as if he were an outsider watching the horrific crime occur. He was unable to provide details or explain his motives, suggesting it felt as if the actions were not his own. Furthermore, Dante could not specify whether the sexual assault happened before or after the murder. This detail was crucial because, in Western Australia, sexual assault on a deceased person is not classified as a crime. He claimed his intent was to rape Sophia, but he never meant to kill anyone. Sophia's relatives were shocked by the police's negligence and blamed them for allowing the dangerous criminal to remain free. They pointed out that in 2003, investigators ignored crucial evidence that showed Dante was dangerous. If that evidence had been addressed and he had been held accountable, Sophia would not have encountered him in the restroom that day, and she would still be alive. It was revealed that Dante wasn't even listed among the most dangerous criminals prone. However, this was not Dante's second crime. In 2001, while on vacation with his family, Dante was arrested for sexually assaulting a young girl in another country. However, due to insufficient evidence, he was released, and no information about the incident was shared with the local police. Before Sophia's murder, Dante stalked at least 10 other girls. Later, the public began discussing new disturbing information about the murder of another child. This was the infamous case of 2-year-old James Bulger, brutally murdered on February 12, 1993. His mother had briefly left him unattended behind the door of a butcher's shop in a shopping center in Liverpool, UK. She didn't intend to stay long as she was just picking up an order, but there was a mix-up, delaying her return. When she came out, her son was missing. She immediately began searching and called the police. James's body was discovered 2 days later. A train had passed over him, but he had died beforehand. A forensic expert identified 42 injuries on James's body, including 10 skull fractures. Because of the numerous injuries, it was impossible to determine which one caused his death. It was later discovered that James had been noticed by 2 9-year-old boys, John Venables and Robert Thompson, who had skipped school that day. They aimlessly wandered around the shopping center, committing several petty thefts. Upon seeing James, they decided to have some fun with him. They forcibly took him away and brutally assaulted him, hitting him with a 10-kilogram iron bar. They kicked, trampled, and threw bricks and stones at him and poured paint on his face. When they saw James was no longer moving, they dragged him to the railroad tracks and left him to die, hoping to disguise the murder as an accident. The crime was quickly solved thanks to CCTV footage from the shopping center, which showed James being taken away, leading to the arrest of John and Robert. They had previously attempted to kidnap another child in a shopping mall, but the mother quickly intervened and saved the child. It was found that after James left the shopping center, they were seen by 38 people along the way. Passers-by observed they forcefully dragging the child. They claimed that James was their younger brother, and they told others they were taking him to the police station because he was lost. No one intervened in the situation. Investigators suspect the crime was not sexual in nature since the child was not wearing underwear, but the examination could not confirm this for certain. Robert Thompson and John Venables denied any sexual abuse of James but were unable to clearly explain why they undressed the child. John and Robert were sentenced to imprisonment for an indefinite period, meaning they would remain in prison until authorities determined they were no longer a threat to society, with a minimum sentence of 10 years. However, due to public pressure, their minimum sentence was increased to 15 years in July 1994. In 1997, the House of Lords overturned this decision, reducing the minimum sentence back to 10 years. Consequently, they served only 8 years in prison and were released in June 2001. By their release, they had completed secondary and advanced level education. While in prison, they suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, with John frequently experiencing nightmares about James. Importantly, they were given new identities and guaranteed complete anonymity. Any publications revealing their new identities or showing their photographs were officially prohibited. The authorities believed they deserved a second chance at a normal life, and this measure was also taken for their safety, as it was feared that the public might harm them. The public was outraged by the lenient punishment and the protection of their identity. People wanted to know their names and whereabouts to avoid any potential danger. There was skepticism about their ability to reform, which proved justified. On March 2, 2010, John was sent back to prison for storing and distributing explicit photos of children. He received a 2-year sentence and was released in February 2018. Then, he to be charged again. John faced charges for possessing explicit child photos, leading to a 40-month prison sentence. There were reports that he might receive a new identity and undergo plastic surgery at the state's expense to keep his identity hidden, a move James's parents strongly opposed. In July 2019, UK authorities discussed the possibility of relocating him to Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, as maintaining his anonymity in the UK had become too costly. There is almost no information about Robert Thompson. The only known fact is that he was forbidden from communicating with John and was relocated. It is unknown whether he reformed or returned to crime like John. After the murder of Sophia Urrutia, many suspected that Dante, who killed Sophia in a restroom, was actually Robert Thompson with a new identity. He received help with relocation and confidentiality, and many details of their biographies matched. Dante lived in Great Britain for 8 years, coinciding with the time of James's murder. In both cases, the victims were found in a shopping center. It is believed there was a sexual motive, and the victims were of a similar age and appearance. However, this theory could not be confirmed. The police denied any connection. The public suspects the denial was due to confidentiality. Many continue to believe they are the same person and consider him very dangerous. The year after Sophia's murder in March, Dante did not plead guilty to any charges. Consequently, the police reduced the charge from premeditated murder to simple murder, which carries a lighter sentence. Additionally, the sexual assault charge was dropped due to the inability to prove it occurred before Sophia's death. This situation highlights the sometimes absurd nature of the Western Australian legal system. Detectives allegedly obtained a confession from Dante, but none of the interrogations were properly recorded, so they could not be used as evidence. At the trial, due to public pressure, Dante was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 13 years. However, he was able to reduce his time on parole. According to the laws at the time of his conviction, Dante was eligible for early release by 2019, with his case reviewed every 3 years. Each time, there is a chance for him to receive a pardon. The next review of Dante's case occurred in 2022, but it was decided to keep him in prison until at least 2025. The family of Sophia and the public hope that Dante, monster, remains incarcerated for life, seeing him as a danger to others. The case of Samantha Knight and Renee Aitken. Samantha Knight was born in 1977. She lived with her parents in the suburbs of Menly, Australia. But her parents' relationship did not last long, and they divorced. Then, she and her mother moved to Bronte. When she was in 6th grade, they relocated again, this time to Bondi, a suburb of Sydney, where they settled in an apartment on Imperial Street. Their lifestyle was modest. Her mother worked long hours, which forced her to be independent. Her father frequently visited and provided financial support. On August 19th, Samantha, a schoolgirl, turned 9 years old. After classes ended at 4 p.m., she returned home around 4:15 p.m., while her mother was still at work. In the 1980s, it was common in the suburbs to use simple door latches. The neighborhood was calm and safe, and everyone knew each other, allowing children to stay home alone in locked houses while their parents worked. This was considered normal, so Samantha had the freedom to come and go from their apartment while her mother was at work. August 19th was just like any other day. After school, Samantha changed into a pink skirt, a dark blue jumper, and blue sandals before heading out for a walk. A few hours later, her mother, Tess Knight, returned home from work and found a half-eaten sandwich in the kitchen, but little girl was missing. Tess wasn't initially worried, as it was common for Samantha to go for walks with friends and sometimes skip meals to do so. She continued with her evening routine, expecting her daughter to return soon. However, as it got darker, Tess began to feel anxious. Samantha usually came home before dark, and her absence was concerning. She decided to search for her daughter. Since they had recently moved to the area, not many people knew her, making the search more difficult. She asked neighbors, acquaintances, and Samantha's friends if they had seen her, but no one had any information. which heightened her alarm. Without a mobile phone, she couldn't call Samantha or track her whereabouts. When she returned home, Tess checked again to see if Samantha had come back while she was out, but she was still missing. In a state of urgency, she called emergency services to report her daughter's disappearance, Samantha. Soon after, the police came to her house. They spoke with she to gather details about Samantha's disappearance. She was confused and said she didn't know what had happened because she was at work. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the area, so the police had to rely on tips from witnesses who might have seen something unusual. Police immediately interviewed neighbors, friends, family members of Samantha and anyone nearby for clues. Several store employees reported seeing the girl between the ages of 163 and 185. Samantha had visited at least 3 different sections of the store selling office supplies, and she was last seen walking down the street. Some witnesses thought she might have been talking to a man. However, they did not find anything suspicious. The police had no other leads. They thoroughly searched the area and followed the route Samantha had taken, but they did not find anything relevant to the investigation. The public was soon informed about the incident. The police requested assistance from local residents through the media, sharing Samantha's photo and description of clothing. Local residents acted quickly. The very next day, hundreds of volunteers participated in a search operation throughout the city. The media also extensively covered this tragic incident. The possibility that Samantha had left home was not even considered. She was too young. At her age, kids typically do not run away from home to spend time with friends. All of her belongings were still at home, and she had never displayed any rebellious behavior before. Samantha was a sweet, kind, and calm girl who worked hard in school, leading detectives to believe she had been kidnapped, possibly taken from her home by someone who maliciously opened the door. Local residents is extremely uneasy. There had never been a kidnapping in their quiet suburb. Residents began to scrutinize one another, fear that the criminal may be living in their area. Investigators had little information to investigate, relying mainly on interviews with local shopkeepers. Unfortunately, no one could provide useful leads to help locate Samantha. The investigation was further complicated because in the 1980s and 1990s, methods of tracking missing persons were not well developed. There were no alert systems like Amber Alerts, no DNA testing, and other modern investigative techniques. Therefore, law enforcement agencies need to conduct searches as efficiently as possible. For instance, they created a mannequin dressed like Samantha the day she disappeared to help jog the memories of those who witnessed it, but this did not produce the expected results. Tess was heartbroken. Samantha's father also joined the search for daughter. Initially, he was even considered a suspect, as investigators thought he might have kidnapped his daughter to keep her with him. However, he denied these accusations. He explained that he maintains a peaceful and respectful relationship with his ex-wife and sees his daughter regularly. There was no reason for him to kidnap her. When the investigation gets difficult, detectives must try their best to identify suspects. The relatives of Samantha began to lose hope of finding her alive and feared the worst. Police are also leaning towards the theory that the girl may have died, possibly taken by human traffickers and taken to another country. This theory was explored, but for 12 years, there is no evidence to confirm this. When the police received a significant lead from a woman, they focused on a local resident named Michael Guider. He lived near where Samantha had disappeared, had been in prison since 1996 for child rape and may be a suspect in Samantha's disappearance. Michael's life is full of disgusting incidents. Born in 1950, he grew up in Melbourne with an alcoholic mother and a younger brother named Tim, born in 1953. Eventually, their mother sent them to an orphanage, where Michael faced further sexual abuse from older children, many of whom were under the influence of drugs. Other children also suffered violence, including Tim, but they all remained silent due to threats. Michael's mental health becomes increasingly serious, and as he matures, he begins to negatively impact the other children in the orphanage. When he was 15 years old, he escaped and began a life of petty crime. His younger brother, Tim, no better. He committed armed robbery and was imprisoned for it. After serving his time, Tim seemed to reform. He became a sculptor, got married, and had children, staying out of trouble and off criminal records. In contrast, Michael continued his criminal activities and showed no intention of changing. He never held a steady job and only worked part-time as a gardener, mowing lawns for neighbors. Michael's first arrest came in the 1970s, when he was charged with setting fire to a store. As an adult, he developed a passion for Australian Aboriginal culture and became knowledgeable about rock art. He has contributed to at least one published book. However, in 1996, he was convicted of sexual offenses for molesting 11 children, aged 2 to 16. At least 60 similar charges were brought against him. Some sources suggested that the actual number of victims could be much higher. During the investigation into the child abuse cases, Michael quickly cooperating with the police. This was taken into account during the sentencing. As a result, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Michael usually acts in a consistent manner. He targeted vulnerable single mothers, often those who struggled with alcohol or drug addiction, or those who were easily influenced. By building trust with these women, he presented himself as kind and courteous, manipulating their perceptions to lower their guard. He often sought opportunities to be alone with their children, claiming he wanted to care for them while their mothers were away. Mothers noticed his attentive behavior and had no qualms about leaving him with their children. By posing as a caregiver, he gained access to the children, which he exploited. Michael would give the children Coca-Cola that was laced with sleeping pills. Once they were unconscious, he photographed and sexually assaulted them. Eventually, some children had the courage to tell their mothers about Michael, and the truth was revealed that he was acting like a serial predator. When the police searched his home, they discovered a large stash of photos, numbering in the thousands. Several photos showed instances of sexual abuse while the victim was unconscious, including images of Samantha and one of her friends without clothes. In one of the photos, police discovered the best friend of Samantha. At that time, she was already 21 years old, and detectives attempted to speak with her. However, both she and her mother refused to cooperate. Eventually, they were summoned to court and compelled to testify. Investigators are looking into a connection between Michael, a serial rapist, and Samantha's disappearance. Among the evidence found, police discovered a peculiar album containing newspaper clippings about missing children, including Samantha. Detectives were curious about why he kept these clippings. Normally, criminals often do this to gather mementos related to their crimes. During questioning, Michael claimed he was simply interested in unsolved cases out of curiosity. While this album was not a major issue, when combined with other elements of his criminal record, it raised serious concerns. After reviewing all the evidence, including photographs of violent scenes, police filed 11 additional charges against him. The total sentence for these new crimes was 6.5 years. At that time, investigators were unable to charge Michaels with kidnapping Samantha, but they suspected his involvement in her disappearance and continued to monitor him. While he was in prison, police observed that he was beaten during all interrogations. He endured severe mistreatment, his cellmates attacked and assaulted him, and the guards failing to intervene. In 2000, journalist Denise Hoffman wrote a book about the missing child, Samantha. She was personally acquainted with Michael and highly appreciated his work as a renowned expert on Australian Aboriginal life. He was knowledgeable in this field and had appeared on television. However, despite their friendship and his expertise, Denise had strong reasons to believe that he was linked to the case of Samantha's disappearance. She begins investigating on her own after he confides in her about his wife, who also knows Samantha's mother. Denise noticed that Michael's demeanor changed significantly whenever the conversation shifted to Samantha's case. During these discussions, his expression will change a lot. He began speaking in a strange, muffled tone and appeared increasingly unsettling. This behavior made Denise even more suspicious of him. Unfortunately, Denise were unable to resolve the case and failed to get a confession from Michael. He denied any involvement in Samantha's disappearance, claiming he had only seen her a few times and did not remember her. This was clearly a lie. To assist the police, Michael's younger brother, Tim, agreed to help him confess. Tim underwent intensive training and consulted psychologists to find the most effective method to help Michael tell the truth. Michael was already under significant stress, and as he broke down, he confessed to accidentally killing Samantha in 1986. He described to the detectives what happened the day little girl disappeared. He claimed that he had known Samantha for some time and had earned her trust, which led her to agree to go with him that day. Michael drove her to a remote area in the wilderness. There, he offered her a bottle of CoCA laced with sleeping pills. After she drank it, she lost consciousness. When he began to assault her, she suddenly woke up and started screaming. To silence her, he gave her more sleeping pills, and she passed out again. Afterward, he briefly stepped out of the car for a walk. When he returned, he found that little girl was unresponsive. However, he maintained throughout the interrogation that it was an accident. He claimed he only intended to assault her and never meant to kill her, insisting that he had never killed anyone before. Michael accepts responsibility for his actions toward Samantha, but he did not apologize to her family or leave the courtroom. In 2002, he confessed during the trial to the unintentional murder of Samantha Knight and was sentenced to 17 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Samantha's family were outraged by what they considered a lenient sentence, but this was the maximum penalty for manslaughter at the time. The prosecutor called Samantha's best friend as a witness. This girl, who appeared in photographs and was believed to have also been affected by Michael's actions, had previously refused to speak to law enforcement, citing fears of revealing information. Her silence had serious consequences for many children, including the tragic loss of Samantha. She attended court with her mother, who supported her, but their identities were kept confidential. Samantha's best friend mentioned that she often felt lonely when her mother was at work, so she will go for a walk. During those times, she met Michael, who gave her the attention she craved. Friend claimed that Samantha's mother sometimes left she with Michael and even spent the night with him, during which he molested she. However, Samantha's mother firmly denied knowing Michael and insisted that she never left him alone with Samantha. Strangely, the witnesses later retracted their statements about Samantha without providing any reasons. Finding her remains for burial became extremely important. Initially, Michael claimed he couldn't remember where Samantha's body was. However, several years into his prison sentence, he suddenly recalled that he had buried her in Cooper Park, just a 15-minute drive from her home. Yet, he later changed his story again, saying the body was buried a bit farther away than he originally indicated. On the map, he pointed to an area where a yacht club now stands, which was built just a year and a half after Samantha's disappearance. Despite extensive searches in the area using trained dogs, Samantha's remains have never been located. To this day, her body has not been found, and many doubt it will ever be found. In addition, Michael is also suspected in the disappearance of 5-year-old Renee Aitken, who vanished without a trace in South Wales in February 1984. When there was a thunderstorm, her brother went to check on her and noticed she was missing. He found her bed empty and the front door open. He told their parents, who then called the police. They began searching for her immediately. However, there was a storm at the time, so it's possible that all the evidence was washed away. Initially, the main suspect was Brian James Fitzpatrick. A man with a history of child kidnapping. He lived nearby and knew Renee's family. However, he died in a car accident just weeks before his trial. For many years, the case went cold, but in 2013, police revisited the investigation and looked into Michael. At the time of Renee's disappearance, he worked as a gardener close to their home. A family member recognized that he bore a resemblance to a suspicious man who had been seen behind their house. In Michael's scrapbook dedicated to missing children, there were articles and photos of Renee. Researcher Denise Hoffman believed that Renee's case shared similarities with the disappearance of another girl, Samantha, as both were small and light. Michael could have used drugs to incapacitate Renee and sneak her out of the house. Michael was skilled at gaining the trust of children, causing suspicions that he was involved in Renee's kidnapping. Detectives questioned him about the incident, but he denied any involvement. They believed him, even though he had previously denied involvement in Samantha's case, which he later admitted. However, the police concluded there was not enough evidence to charge Michael with kidnapping, and Renee's case remains unsolved. She has not been found. Both the police and Renee's family believe she has likely been dead for a long time. While in prison, Michael developed an interest in Aboriginal culture and history, studying various materials on the subject. He authored several works, which were sent to libraries across Australia. In total, he wrote 16 pieces, ranging from 6 to 28 pages long. He also pursued studies in archaeology and earned a degree in that field. Michael was remarkably intelligent, impressing everyone with his capabilities. He has the potential to become a scientist and can contribute to research projects. However, he chose a path of crime. In 2014, Michael became eligible for parole after serving the minimum term of his imprisonment. This made the public extremely indignant, as many people believed he should remain in prison. Individuals like him will never change and will continue to pose a threat to society. Due to public backlash, Michael's request for parole was not granted and he remains in detention. The public, including Samantha's mother, wants Michael to spend the rest of his life in prison. She continued to suffer from the pain of losing her daughter. She could not give her daughter a proper burial and had never seen any sign of remorse from Michael. Supporters of Michael sought to challenge his sentence. They pointed to his participation in 55 therapy programs in prison, claiming he had undergone rehabilitation and was a model prisoner, he deserving of freedom. He behaved well and did not violate prison rules, leading to his release on September 5, 2019, at the age of 68. As part of the bail conditions, Michael was required to stay under strict supervision for an additional 5 years in a special facility for former prisoners. Police fitted him with a tracking bracelet, and he was given a lengthy list of 56 restrictions. These included bans on visiting public places, playgrounds, and schools, a prohibition on contacting minors, restrictions on leaving the country, a ban on changing his name or appearance. He was also subject to regular checks for drug and alcohol use. Despite these measures, there was no guarantee that Michael, the serial rapist, would refrain from committing further crimes. Even his younger brother, Tim, believed releasing him was a mistake. The public was outraged by his release, they fearing that he was already planning new crimes against children. When Michael was released, he had a large tumor in his groin, which he had refused to treat while in prison due to a lack of trust in the medical staff. After his release, he focused on his health, successfully treating the tumor and managing his heart disease. However, he declined medication to reduce his libido because he believed they would interfere with his other medications. Initially, Michael stayed in a shelter near Long Bay, but when the public discovered his location and began to pursue him, he was moved to a secret location. The public was outraged that once his supervision period ended, he would be completely free, able to change his name and appearance, get married, have children, and travel, opportunities that Samantha would never have. This led many to believe that his sentence was unfair. The case of Jennifer and Nura Jackson. On the night of June 5, 2005, Jennifer Jackson, 39, was found dead at her home in Memphis, Tennessee, United States. The night before, June 4th, Jennifer had attended a friend's wedding and returned home around 11:30 p.m. She lived in a house in a prestigious area of Memphis with her 18-year-old daughter, Nura. Their relationship was so close that they were more like best friends than mother and daughter. Jennifer had previously been married to Nazmi Hassan, a captain in the Lebanese army, and they had a daughter when she was 20. However, their marriage did not last and they divorced shortly after Nura was born. Nura remained with her mother and her father did not visit often due to his work that required frequent travel. As a result, Nura grew up without a father. Jennifer worked hard to provide for herself and her daughter, which strengthened her character. She achieved a lot, bought a house and a car, and made sure her daughter lacked nothing. When Nura turned 16, her father retired early and moved nearby. They became close during this time. Unfortunately, this close relationship did not last long. Just a year later, her father was murdered in his store. The crime scene provided no clues and the case remains unsolved. After this tragedy, Nura changed a lot. She started skipping school, going to parties frequently, rarely coming home, and relying solely on her mother for financial support. Nura's mother, Jennifer, felt frustrated and did not know how to help her daughter. Although she tried to guide Nura, nothing seemed to work. Friends advised Jennifer to wait out this challenging period, saying that such behavior was common among teenagers and that things would eventually improve. Trusting their advice, Jennifer chose to take a step back. However, tensions within the family remain high due to Nura's defiance until a new horrifying event occurs. At approximately 5 a.m. on June 5, 2005, neighbors heard a loud and persistent knocking on the door. They were still asleep, confused as to who could be visiting at such an early hour and worried that something was wrong. The neighbors lived across the street from Jennifer's house. When they opened the door, they found an 18-year-old girl named Nura screaming, saying that someone had broken into their house. The neighbor then took out a gun for protection and followed Nura to Jennifer's house. They entered through the back door. Nura entered first. She rushed to the phone and called 911. She told the police that someone had attacked her mother. While Nura was talking to 911, she gave the neighbor directions to Jennifer's bedroom. When the neighbor entered the room, he found Jennifer lying on the floor at the foot of the bed, covered in blood. She showed no signs of life, and there was a lot of blood in her mouth and on the bed. He hurried to the Jennifer to check her pulse, but she was already cold and there was no way to help her. Realizing she was dead, he went back to tell his wife while Nura was still on the phone with the police. Neighbors later returned to Jennifer's home to support a grieving Nura and keep her company. Paramedics arrived to confirm Jennifer's death, determining that she had been dead for several hours. Forensic experts began examining the crime scene, while police questioned Nura, who may have been the only witness to her mother's attack. Nura said that she came home from the party around 5 in the morning and found someone breaking into the house. Worried about her mother, she quickly ran to Jennifer's bedroom, where she found her unconscious. Nura then ran to a neighbor's house for help, saying that she didn't see anyone in the house. During the investigation of the crime scene, police observed a broken window on the inner door that connects the kitchen to the garage, with shards of glass scattered on the kitchen floor. It appeared that the window had been broken from inside the house rather than outside. All entrance doors were locked with no apparent signs of forced entry. Experts noted that it seemed Jennifer was attacked while sleeping in her bed, leaving her unable to defend herself. The situation appeared staged as a break-in, but there were inconsistencies. The hole in the window was positioned much higher than the door lock, making it impractical for an attacker to reach the door handle and open it. Upon further investigation, the police discovered a second hidden lock near the broken glass, which was easily accessible. This lock, equipped with a concealed hinge on the door frame, could not be seen from outside, indicating that the attacker was familiar with the house. On the kitchen floor, police found bloody boot prints and drops of blood. In the bedroom, blood covered the bed, and Jennifer's body was on the floor, suggesting she was attacked while in bed and then dragged to the floor. The attacker inflicted over 50 wounds on Jennifer's head. There was also a wicker basket present, reminiscent of other crime scenes where criminals cover the victim's face to prevent them from seeing the attacker. The situation seemed suspicious. On the surface, the house appeared affluent, much like the surrounding neighborhood where the victim lived, which could have attracted burglars. However, nothing was stolen. Valuables were clearly visible throughout the house. There was no sign of struggle, and the woman had not been sexually assaulted. So what was the motive? The brutal nature of the attack on Jennifer suggested a personal vendetta. Consequently, police began to investigate her life more closely to identify potential suspects. At the same time, the police searched the area around the house, interviewing neighbors and looking for surveillance cameras that might offer critical evidence. Unfortunately, at that hour, all the nearby residents were still asleep. No one witnessed the attacker or heard anything unusual. Additionally, there were no nearby surveillance cameras to provide any leads. Police learned from Nura that Jennifer had broken up with Mark Irwin shortly before her death. The motive for the murder appeared to be jealousy and resentment, leading police to focus on Mark and bring him in for questioning. During the interview, Mark expressed the pain of the breakup to him, saying that he loved Jennifer and would never hurt her. Mark said that he called Jennifer around midnight to discuss personal matters, hoping to mend their relationship, but she did not answer. Assuming she was asleep, he decided not to bother her and went to bed. Mark mentioned that he stayed at his house that night, which was quite a distance from Jennifer's house, at least an hour-and-a-half drive. Although he lacked a solid alibi, he seemed genuinely distressed and cooperated fully with the investigation, passing a polygraph test. Police also tracked his car and phone, confirming that he did not leave his local area that night. This evidence led to Mark being cleared as a suspect in the murder. Nura said that her mother's second husband, whom Jennifer divorced in 2001, was abusive. He had threatened Jennifer and had once pointed a gun at her mother. Nura suspected that he was involved in her mother's murder. Police investigated this lead but discovered that he had an alibi for the time of the murder. After interviewing Jennifer's relatives, police determined that she had no enemies. Instead, all the evidence pointed to Nura, who had been arguing with her mother recently. Nura may have staged the crime. She may have had a motive to kill her mother to inherit her mother's money. During the investigation, it became clear that Nura was a troubled teenager. She not only had a habit of attending parties but was also frequently smoking marijuana. Nura had a short temper, often displayed aggressive behavior, and would resort to using foul language. She demanded money and, when denied, would resort to physical aggression. Additionally, there was a conflict between Nura and her mother regarding the inheritance from her father. Nura wants to sell the property quickly for cash, while her mother wants to keep it. Police suspect Nura is involved in the crime and have summoned her for questioning. Nura repeated the story she had told earlier. She had attended a party and returned home around 5 in the morning to find her mother brutally murdered. She claimed she had nothing to do with the crime. However, the police soon realized that her story was not entirely accurate. After checking her bank card activity and surveillance camera footage from her car, they discovered that at 4 in the morning, she had stopped at a 24-hour store to buy a first aid kit. The kit was later found in her car, but Noura had not reported it. Forensic experts determined that her mother's time of death was between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. A review of Noura's phone records showed that she was at her mother's house at the time of the murder, with details that matched the timeline perfectly. In addition, Noura had a small cut on her left hand, which she could not explain. Experts believe the wound may have occurred while she was holding a knife to stab her mother. Noura said she did not tell police about the trip to the store because she did not think it was important. The police interviewed the friends who were with Noura at the party, and they stated that she left early, around midnight, and no one else saw her after that. They also mentioned that there was no beer at the event. Noura had claimed at the party that she had opened drinks and shared increasingly bizarre stories, including singing, spilling beer, getting minor injuries, rescuing a stuck cat, and burning herself while cooking. During the investigation, it was observed that Noura was wearing a warm, long-sleeved sweatshirt that nearly covered her hands, despite it being hot outside. She also had a band-aid on her hand and appeared to have wet hair, suggesting she had just showered. During the interrogation, police asked Noura why her hair was wet and why she was wearing a sweatshirt. Noura insisted she hadn't showered and that she often wore sweatshirts, even in warm weather. However, her friends disagreed, stating that she typically didn't dress that way. The police could not find the murder weapon or any bloody clothes that could link Noura to the crime at the time of the attack. They did discover drops of Jennifer's blood on the porch, indicating that the assailant had left the house with blood on them and had likely disposed of the knife elsewhere. As a result, the Noura Jackson was arrested and charged with Jennifer's murder. Bail was set at $500,000, which Noura could not afford, leaving her in prison awaiting trial, facing the possibility of life imprisonment. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Noura killed her mother due to constant conflicts over Noura's lifestyle, which included partying, skipping school, sex, and drug use. Jennifer refused to give Noura money, which angered her and prompted her to kill her mother to gain access to her assets. Witnesses spoke of a troubled relationship between the two. Jennifer's sister said that tensions had escalated a week before the murder, when Jennifer told Noura that she needed to change her lifestyle or leave the house. A friend who attended the party with Noura claimed that Noura expressed feelings of hatred toward her mother. A cousin shared that Noura asked about inheritance and life insurance, which raised suspicions. A neighbor reported that Noura had angrily demanded money from her mother just a week earlier. Additionally, evidence suggested that there was a dispute regarding the sale of her father's car. The prosecution argued that there had been a staged break-in and that phone records showed Noura was home at the time of the murder. The prosecution presented evidence that Noura had left the party early and spent about 3 hours at home before going to get a first aid kit. While Noura claimed she had been driving around town, phone records showed that she had actually been at home. She claimed that she had left her phone at home, but this was disproved when she called a friend from the store. The friend confirmed that Noura had called him at 1 a.m. on her home phone and hung up immediately. The prosecution argued that she hung up because she was afraid of being discovered after mistakenly calling from her home phone. The prosecutor pointed to inconsistencies in Noura's story, such as the sweatshirt and the cut on her hand. It was determined that she had gone to Walgreens at 4 a.m. to purchase a first aid kit for her cut, which included antiseptic and bandages. Surveillance footage from the store showed Noura asking for tissues at the counter to wipe away the blood, suggesting she had a fresh, bleeding wound. The prosecutor argued that Noura had worn the sweatshirt to cover her cut but was unsuccessful, as police had noticed the bandage on her hand. During the trial, a recording of Noura's 911 call was played. The prosecutor highlighted a peculiar moment. When asked if her mother had been shot, Noura confidently replied no, even though she was in a panic and likely couldn't tell the difference between a gunshot and a stab wound. A neighbor, whom Nura had contacted that morning, testified that he was surprised by how openly she discussed the incident. The neighbor, whom Nura had asked for help that morning, was clearly surprised to hear her talk about the situation. Nura entered her home first, seemingly unafraid, while the neighbor followed her with a gun, worried about a potential attack. This behavior aroused suspicion. The prosecutor alleged that Nura was under the influence of alcohol and illegal drugs and was motivated by a desire to make money to support her partying lifestyle. However, Nura barely spoke during the trial. Her attorney, who took the case pro bono, spoke for her most of the time. The defense argued that there was no direct evidence linking Nura to the crime. No murder weapon was found that contained her DNA or fingerprints, allowing her to be ruled out as a suspect. The lawyer accused the police of handling the investigation poorly. They found no evidence that would help identify the criminal. So the police chose to blame the troubled daughter to close the case. The lawyer argued that statistically, children rarely kill their parents, and this case differs from typical maternal murder cases. The attorney argued that the entire case was based on circumstantial evidence. Jennifer's bedroom did not contain Nura's DNA, and there was no Jennifer's blood on Nura's sweatshirt. The lawyer argued that if Nura had attacked her mother, she would have suffered much more injuries, but she only suffered one cut. The prosecutor denied this claim, saying that Jennifer did not defend herself. Instead, she was asleep at the time of the attack. Despite the defense's arguments against the investigation, the prosecutor's evidence convinced the jury, resulting in Nura Jackson being convicted of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20 years and 9 months in prison. After nearly 10 years, the Tennessee Supreme Court granted Nura a new trial. It was revealed that a key witness, a friend of Nura's, came forward, claiming that she had called him to her house to resolve a problem. That night, the witness had also used drugs, which may have affected his judgment, and the prosecutor was charged with withholding this information during the trial. On August 22, 2014, the Supreme Court overturned Nura's conviction, stating that this testimony was crucial to the jury's decision and that they might have ruled differently if they had known the truth. Concerns were raised about the integrity of the prosecutor, Amy Wyrick, as it became evident she had engaged in similar misconduct in other cases by concealing important facts to secure convictions. The court reprimanded her for these actions. In response, Amy stated she was prepared to retry the case and demonstrate Nura's guilt. Nura's excitement about her new trial was significantly dampened. She had new lawyers who supported her and successfully moved her case to a neighboring district court to minimize publicity and avoid involvement from prosecutor Amy. Despite this, Nura was still very anxious about the possibility of facing trial again. Ultimately, she was offered a plea bargain for a lighter sentence, which she accepted. She used a legal option called an Alford plea, where she maintained her innocence but pleaded guilty because the prosecution had enough evidence to convict her. As a result, her sentence was reduced to 15 years, and she was released early for good behavior in 2016, having served a total of 11 years in prison. During her time in prison, she experienced a worsening of a medical condition that prevents her from having children, and her criminal record makes it impossible for her to adopt. The case of Neurotter family. Michelle and Lloyd Neurotter, two high school students, have a very close relationship. He was a year younger than she, but this didn't stop him from falling in love with her. They dated for 2 years and then got married. By the mid-90s, Lloyd graduated with an engineering degree and began teaching science at a university. He then worked as an engineer at a factory. Michelle pursued higher education and became an English teacher at a college. During this time, their first daughter was born, followed by 2 more daughters later on. The 90s were a period of many important changes for them. They moved to a large house in a town called Corning, near New York. They appeared happy. Lloyd works very hard but still makes time for his family, especially his 3 daughters. Michelle was positive and energetic, managing the household and caring for the children. As a teacher, she also educated their children at home. Together, they formed an ideal family, admired by many of their acquaintances. Over time, Lloyd's behavior changed significantly. He used to be a caring father and husband, but then he began to act in a patriarchal manner, manipulating his family to control them. He demanded complete obedience to the rules he set. If there is a conflict, he is willing to use force to force his wife and children to agree with his point of view. This caused the family's relationships to deteriorate. The only daughter with whom Lloyd maintains a good relationship is his second daughter, Carrie. She stood out among her siblings because of her loyalty to he. He spent time with her, took her to the ballet and other events, and even did her hair and makeup. However, he did not show such affection to the rest of the family. As Carrie grew up, she became a very thoughtful person, actively involved in many charitable organizations, and enjoyed helping the homeless. Despite some disagreements, but the Neurotter family stayed together until 2008. During this time, America faced a severe financial crisis, causing job and money problems for millions. Lloyd lost his job and had to look for a new one, but many others were in the same situation. Michelle also looked for jobs but couldn't find any. She had been managing household duties and caring for their daughters. Lloyd eventually found a decent job in New Jersey. Michelle was relieved that he found employment. He moved to New Jersey alone, while Michelle took a part-time job in their hometown, Corning, juggling it with childcare and housework. It was challenging for her, as she was supporting the family on her own. A few months later, things took a strange turn, when Lloyd suddenly demanded a divorce from Michelle. This decision was unexpected because there had been no serious signs of trouble in their marriage. Even their friends hadn't noticed any quarrels between them. Lloyd's decision was a complete shock to Michelle and children, leaving her feeling lost. She had been an excellent mother and wife, but her husband put her in a difficult position. He claimed that during their time apart, he has no more feelings and no longer wanted to be with her. Worse still, before proposing the divorce, he had that she cut off all ties with her family and friends. This further upset Michelle, as she felt isolated and lacking support. Despite experiencing a nervous breakdown, she managed to pull herself together. She found a job as an English teacher at a college and became a single mother. Several years after the divorce, Michelle and her children moved to another house in the same city. Her daughters had grown up, which made her life easier. The girls can help with housework and take care of themselves. This allowed Michelle to focus more on her work. She has built a successful career and made a lot of money. Even so, Lloyd, a manipulative person, still makes things difficult when fights over child support and arguing about alimony. The divorce process lasted about 5 years, during which Lloyd repeatedly attempted to discredit Michelle to gain custody. Despite this, Michelle fought back, she defending herself in court and made a rebuttal against Lloyd. Lloyd was a skilled manipulator, and after 2010, the middle daughter, Carrie, moved in with him. Little girl believed it was her own decision because she loved and missed her father. The other children did not agree with her choice and urged her to stay with their mother, Michelle. In court, the judge supported the decision of the other children to remain with Michelle. On August 28, 2017, a family friend arrived at Michelle's house to pick up her youngest daughter for swimming practice. As he got out of the car and approached the house, he noticed Michelle in an unusual position by the stairs, visible through the living room window. He knocked on the door, but no one answered, and Michelle didn't move. The dog was barking continuously, which made him feel uneasy. He found the door was unlocked, so he went inside to check. As he got closer, he realized that Michelle was not standing but was hanging from the railing. He checked her pulse, but her hand was cold and numb. He immediately called 911, reports that Michelle appears to have ended his life. When emergency services arrived, they confirmed that 46-year-old Michelle had been dead for some time and beyond repair. The police searched the house but found no one else present, even though Michelle lived there with her 14-year-old daughter. Carrie lived with Lloyd, and the eldest daughter was away at college. At first, it seemed like Michelle had committed end his life. However, as the police investigated, they found more inconsistencies in the case. There were marks on Michelle's face, suggesting the incident may have been staged. It was also strange that the youngest daughter was nowhere to be seen, even though she was supposed to be home. This led the police to consider both murder and the possible kidnapping of the child. Detectives contacted Carrie and Lloyd. They first reached Carrie, and the little girl said that her youngest sister was there. This interested the police, as the younger daughter never missed training and did not want to go to her father's house, Lloyd. Michelle hadn't allowed her to miss school the day before, so why did she go there? The police then confirmed this with Carrie. Carrie explained she had stayed overnight at Michelle's. Carrie and her sister left Michelle's home long before a family friend discovered Michelle. According to little girl, Michelle had been unstable and hysterical during the day, so Carrie didn't want to leave her younger sister with her mother and took her with her. The story seemed implausible because Michelle's body was cold when discovered, indicating she had died long before. This contradicted Carrie's statement that they left shortly before a family friend found Michelle's. Contacting Michelle's acquaintances and friends also made Carrie's story more suspicious, as they provided a different perspective to the police. A friend mentioned that 2 days before her death, Michelle attended a court hearing about custody issues for her youngest daughter. Lloyd was actively fighting for custody, but he was unexpectedly absent from the last meeting and did not answer calls, which was very unlike him. Michelle was very happy because she would win custody of her youngest daughter. She even celebrated with her lawyer, confident she would be granted full custody due to Lloyd's absence. Therefore, she had no reason to be anxious or depressed, as the custody issue had been resolved in her favor. Michelle's mother, Jeannie, upon learning about the tragedy, immediately informed the police that she suspected Lloyd of being responsible for her death. She could not believe that Michelle would choose to end her own life and leave her children behind. Consequently, Lloyd became the prime suspect, because for years, he tried to take away Michelle's custody, and their divorce had been contentious. It was initially difficult to reach Lloyd. According to Carrie, he was with her at the time of the murder, help her settle into her new home before going to university. Lloyd spent the night at a hotel in Rochester, which is about 160 kilometers from Cortland, and then flew to California for a job interview, placing him 4,000 kilometers away. When investigators contacted Lloyd and informed him of Michelle's death, he showed no emotion. After the trial, Lloyd went to the police station and confirmed Carrie's claim that during the time of Michelle's death, he was in another city helping Carrie move. According to Lloyd, Carrie came to see him at the hotel to see how he was getting along. He then took little girl to the parking lot, and she left, and he returned to his room. He provided the hotel reservation as evidence. Although he agreed to take a polygraph test, he never did. Detectives couldn't file charges due to insufficient evidence, but they were suspicious The police began reviewing CCTV footage and phone records to track the movements of Lloyd and Carrie in the days leading up to Michelle's death. They found inconsistencies between the footage and the location of Lloyd's phone, suggesting he was deliberately leaving his phone behind to hide his movements. It became clear he was not truthful. Carrie was indeed with he at a Rochester hotel, but in the evening, they went to the parking lot, and he did not return to the room as he claimed. They went somewhere on the night of the murder and only returned at 7 a.m. the next day. Investigators found that Lloyd was in financial trouble. He has to bear large debts. He owed $100,000 on one credit card and was in desperate need of money. However, after the death of Michelle, he received over $200,000 from her life insurance, which was beneficial for him. This made investigators more suspicious of him, and they scrutinized him more closely. When checking the location data from Carrie and Lloyd's cell phones, investigators found out that it seemed like Carrie was involved too. The decision was made to monitor the conversations between Carrie and Lloyd. Wiretaps of their phone calls revealed they were indeed hiding something. They avoided many topics during their discussions, and Lloyd often abruptly ended Carrie's questions, as if aware they were being monitored. Some conversations were deferred to face-to-face meetings. Lloyd repeatedly stressed the importance of keeping quiet during their calls, indicating they had secrets to conceal. The detectives were certain they were on the right track and expected Carrie and Lloyd to confess, but it didn't happen. So, the police decided to accelerate the investigation by speaking to Carrie directly. They invited her for questioning. However, she did not go to the police station, making various excuses. Through wiretapping, the police discovered that Lloyd was pressuring her to delay and forbade her from going to the station to avoid exposure. Meanwhile, a forensic expert performed an autopsy on Michelle and confirmed clear signs of murder. He found bruises around her eyes and marks on her chin. It appeared she was attacked from behind and strangled. The attacker held her by the throat, making it difficult for her to resist. It was evident that she hadn't committed to end his life, and the situation was clearly a setup. This forced them to contact Carrie again. However, she continued not to go to the police station. The detectives didn't want to hear her excuses anymore, so they met her right after school. She was caught off guard and confused at the police station. Initially, she denied everything. She admitted to being with Lloyd at Michelle's house that morning, but claimed she didn't know what happened there. Her parents started arguing, then they went upstairs and continued arguing. Under pressure from the detectives, Carrie revealed an even more terrifying than Lloyd's. Carrie confessed that Lloyd really killed Michelle, and she was there to ensure her sister didn't witness the crime. She was actually an accomplice to the murder. A week before the incident, she and Lloyd planned to make it look like Michelle had ended her life. The police listened to the candid confession of she. She admitted to hating her mother but couldn't explain why. She idolized her father, Lloyd. This is typical behavior of a manipulated person. Under Lloyd's influence, Carrie's hatred for Michelle grew, he manipulating her until the end. This manipulation led her to become an accomplice, agreeing to help him, covering for him, and help prove his alibi. The police arrested Carrie. Then, they went to Lloyd's house, but he wasn't there. Investigators tracked him down in Princeton using his phone. When officers arrived at the parking lot where he was located, Lloyd saw them and climbed onto a railing, threatening to jump from the 5th floor. After 2 hours of negotiations, the police were able to reach him, and he was arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with evidence. He was shocked by the arrest and denied all charges. He claimed he was at a hotel during the crime. Phone records supported his alibi, and he had a room reservation at the time. However, CCTV footage showed him leaving the hotel with Carrie at night and returning during the day. GPS data placed him near Michelle's house at the time of the murder, and Michelle's pajamas had his DNA. This evidence dismantled his alibi. 19-year-old Carrie was charged with second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and concealment of evidence. She faced a potential life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. To avoid the maximum penalty, she admitted her guilt and agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. She was required to testify against her own father at the trial. During the trial, the prosecutor highlighted a troubling aspect of the case. Carrie was directly involved in the crime. She was present in Michelle's house and assisted Lloyd. Despite having multiple chances to stop the crime, she chose not to intervene and instead helped her father murder her mother. According to the evidence, Carrie and Lloyd arrived at Michelle's house early in the morning. She trusted them and opened the front door, unaware of the impending betrayal by they. Lloyd attacked Michelle and strangled her with a rope. While this happened, Carrie ensured that her younger sister remained asleep and did not witness the crime. After the murder, they left through the back door, preventing the younger sister from realizing what had occurred inside the house. The evidence collected by the detectives included nearly 26 files. Most pointed out that Lloyd had been turning Carrie against her mother, Michelle, for years. He consistently insulted Michelle and portrayed her negatively. Once Carrie moved in with him, he began to restrict her communication. His goal was to kill Michelle and other children. Consequently, she unintentionally developed hatred toward Michelle. The prosecution claimed that the motive for the murder was to claim life insurance money and avoid sharing custody of his youngest daughter. Lloyd believed that making Michelle's death look like she had ended her own life would allow them to live comfortably with the money. In court, Carrie testified that Lloyd gave her a harsh ultimatum: either they kill her mother, or he might end his own life. He complained about his difficult financial situation because he had to pay $6,000 in alimony every month, stating he couldn't continue living this way. Faced with this, Carrie made a dire choice and agreed to help in the crime against Michelle. The prosecutor acknowledged that Lloyd manipulated Carrie and advocated for lenient punishment for her. Ultimately, he admitted his guilt in the murder. As a result, Lloyd was found guilty of first-degree murder and other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and is currently held at Clinton Correctional Facility in New York. During the trial, Carrie's maternal grandmother, Jeannie, requested a lighter sentence for Carrie and a harsher sentence for Lloyd, who had tormented Michelle throughout their 25-year marriage and ultimately killed her. Jeannie expressed that she did not believe Michelle would have wanted a severe prison sentence for Carrie, but rather for little girl to lead a happy life. Carrie was found guilty of concealing evidence. The judge considered Jeannie's plea and the prosecutor's perspective, resulting in the lightest possible sentence of 1 to 3 years in prison. Carrie was released early on January 16, 2020.